I knew there was something more to this awakening, but I didn't know what. And I felt like I'm not going to look at any more books. I'm not going to look at YouTube videos. I'm not going to try to find the answer somewhere else. And what happened is what started to come into view for me was pretty astounding. And that was about the senses, the sense gates. I don't know, the senses started to kind of like really come into the forefront. And then I realized, like, because I didn't understand this, but I realized I can't separate awareness from any of the sense gates. I went through them all. Consciousness was then, constructing a world out there, all the quote unquote knowledge I ever thought I had was really being constructed in the mind. And the whole interface upon which all this information had been gathered, I was just like astounded. I was like, how is it possible that I could go through my whole life and the interface itself has been overlooked?
So great to meet you, Chris.
Beautiful to meet you too, Ilona. Yeah, yeah.
Hi, everyone. Today I'm speaking to Chris Guimond. And here we are. I don't know much about you, but I know you are a non-duality teacher or facilitator. I don't know how you even call yourself. So,
Yeah, I think awakening guide, non-dual facilitator. Yeah.
sweet. So the podcast is called Awakening Now. So we can talk all things about awakening. And to start with, I would like to find out your definition of awakening. What is awakening? Awakening from, awakening to? What's the whole thing? How do you see it? I know this
Such
word
a big
means
question.
different things for different people.
Yeah. And I think I might answer it different, depending on which day you catch me.
Hmm?
Maybe I would start by saying ultimately it's about coming out of suffering. And I think the central part of it is solving the identity problem.
Aha.
And when I say identity, I mean like how it feels to be you, what you take to be you. And we can't really separate out what that means in relation to what this is, what the world is. I think they go together. Mm. I found myself thinking a few weeks ago, I don't know, it just kind of came to me thinking about very young babies, like let's say maybe the first, I don't know, maybe 6 months to 12 months, something like in that time frame. And I really got thinking about how there really isn't that subject object split yet. And they're just so present to their experience, all the sensations, the sounds, the colors, and there's really no thought processes to really, label or interpret. So it's kind of like, it's such an innocent place, and I think if a young baby had a question, a wordless question, it would probably be, what is this?
Mm. Very sweet.
Yeah,
What is this?
just endless curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we
Mm.
learn the language, and here we go. Get an identity on the shoulders and carry that.
Mm. Yeah.
Mm. I love how you said that it's solving identity problem. And with that, all the suffering falls away, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah. I can speak for myself. I think life before awakening was kind of like a constant low level, I guess you could say internal friction
Mm-hmm.
that maybe like a mixture of fear, not even conscious, uh, and doubt. Am I doing things right? Am I getting it right? Yeah. But not even like strangely enough, not even really conscious of it, but it certainly was coloring how I lived.
Same here. I remember I used to have days when I would just shut myself in a room and cry all day,
Yeah.
thinking, oh, poor me, life isn't fair. I know I'm laughing now, but at that time it seems very serious. Mm.
Yeah. Mm. Mm.
So what happened in your story? How did you come to solve the identity problem?
I think there was something always there that was in some way really drawn to truth, even though I didn't know what truth was. There was something that, it was some kind of like orienting force, if you will, that
Mhm.
was there. Uh, yeah, it was almost like I had a premonition that at some point in my life this would become the central focus, but I wasn't thinking of it in terms of joining a religion or some spiritual path. It wasn't really how I was thinking about it. Mm. And then what happened is I got married young, had 4 kids, and then in my 30s, what happened was I went through a real existential crisis that lasted about 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And I see that as what really, really got things underway because it was kind of coming to me how somehow, I don't know, I was just feeling I've managed to overlook the amount of conflict and suffering in the world. And I started to really pay attention to it, not so much like going into news or stuff like that, but I was aware of, conflict between countries, conflict within families, conflict within relationships, conflict within workplaces. And the conflict, there was the conflict part of it, which was really mysterious to me, why there was so much conflict, but also the level of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, I had been brought up Catholic, and then as a teen had decided I didn't want to have anything to do with organized religion. So I didn't really have any kind of philosophy or framework for understanding life when this all started. So it really felt like a real existential crisis, like maybe all of this suffering and conflict is utterly meaningless. And I would say, uh, because probably a big part of what helped me to get through that 3 years was the fact I had young kids. Because there was a lot of suffering, there was suicidal ideation, which I'd never had before. I never really understood why somebody would kill themselves or even think about it. And now I could really see how the mind can present that as an option when the suffering is too great. Mm. Yeah. So that's where it began.
Oh, wow. That's intense. And thanks to
Yeah.
those kids that kind of kept you going.
Mm. Yeah. And then it was kind of on the heels of emerging from that I met somebody who really had a great influence on my life. And she was somebody who has since passed away, but I do believe she probably had a lot of realization. She'd been part of a Tibetan Buddhist order for a couple of decades and done a lot of meditation. And probably that, was contributing, but I think there was something going on even from childhood because I met and became friends with her mother after she passed away. She passed away from cancer in 2001. But I met her mother who said, even as a young child, she really was quite different in a lot of ways. So she was an amazing, amazing influence. And I would say really got me interested in meditation and kind of like looking into Buddhism in particular. And we had talked about doing a 10-day silent retreat together. And unfortunately, she passed away before we could do it. So 4 months after she passed away, I went to a 10-day Goenka retreat.
Aha. Mhm.
And honestly, I was quite a mess, when I went into the retreat. I was still grieving quite a bit the
Mhm.
loss of my friend, um, and really didn't have a lot of concentration skills at all. Yet on day 8 of that first 10-day retreat, I had that first major shift.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, it was a very tough retreat. I spent the first 5 days obsessed with leaving.
Mhm.
Uh, and then on the 6th day, I felt, okay, I think I've made it just over the halfway point. I think I can manage to stay. And in a silent retreat, like the mind really calms down. You're not talking and you're doing a lot of meditation and you're away from your usual environment. So it's really a great, opportunity to, look more deeply. And what happened for me was on the 8th day, I was sitting in the meditation hall and had the mind just kind of go completely silent. And it was so shocking to me. I didn't really know. It was in a way kind of terrifying because I'd never experienced anything like that, like a real cessation of thought. And this fear reaction came up. My heart started pounding. I think if I hadn't had that existential crisis, I wouldn't have had the skills to just kind of like calm myself down. And so that fear subsided. But then when I just kind of resumed the meditation, the silence remained. And the fear reaction came once more, but it wasn't as strong. And then that was it. That was it. It was um, really such a clear seeing that I wasn't my thoughts. I didn't know what I was, but I knew for sure I wasn't my thoughts.
That's huge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
this is a very sticky point for many, many people that are on the journey to see through
Mhm.
these thoughts and what's going on there. Because one of the biggest identifications is with the thinker or the voice
Mm.
in the head. So for you, it's just flat out,
Yeah,
flatlined. Bye
yeah.
bye. Very
Yeah,
nice.
I really see my life kind of like as before and after
Uh-huh.
that moment, for sure. And I think like a lot of people, reactivity really fell away for some time. And that's one of the most, I think, delicious parts of that first awakening is the freedom from reactivity. And of course, we see like a lot of the reactivity is just about the thoughts. So when the reactivity is gone, um, the mind calms down a lot. So I went home. I had kind of like a classic honeymoon that lasted quite strong for about 3 months.
Uh-huh.
And I had no idea, what had happened. Like to tell you the truth, I thought everybody went home from a 10-day Vipassana retreat the same. I didn't really, and uh and so I came home and I just felt like, wow, this is the way life's supposed to be. It was just like such an incredible feeling of freedom. And I really didn't have a lot of words to put on it. There wasn't even really a need to put words on it. It was just delightful, just that sense of presence and freedom from that constant inner friction. So that lasted for 3 wonderful months.
Yay.
And then I got kicked out of the Garden of Eden.
Back to the human
Yeah,
condition.
yeah.
Mm.
And so for me, let's say over the next 3 months, I actually found myself, um, I think what happened is that natural emotional purging process was really wanting to get underway. But I didn't understand it as such. I was very confused. And I thought, I was thinking, well, I felt so wonderful. I need to get back to that, right? I had no idea. So because this first shift happened in the context of a 10-day Vipassana retreat, I went back like 3 months later and did a second. I was in like a kind of like a low-level depression when I went back. And by the time I finished that retreat, that depression lifted, and I never had another depression after. But I felt like, okay, I'm relieved that the depression is gone, but I didn't get back what I wanted back, which was that, first awakening. And so for me, what happened is, I think I ended up, because I was part of this Goenka Vipassana tradition, where it's really a lot about the technique. Everything is supposed to be resolved with a technique. And unfortunately, what happened for me is I ended up using the meditation practice as a way to manage my emotions, not really realizing that I was doing that. I didn't know the word bypassing. I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't know it was counterproductive. But it was like I was almost like holding a compass, trying to orient myself to what felt better. And if feeling better was meditating, that's what I was doing. Now, there was definitely benefits to all, like I did this for 14 years, going to 10-day silent retreats and even managing courses. And I thought I would be doing this for the rest of my life.
How interesting. I never been to one.
It's it can be beneficial for some people, although, well, I'm going to say this, if somebody's listening to this that has gotten a lot out of being long-term with Vipassana, I'm going to say I think that's really wonderful. But personally, I think that staying as long as I did was actually counterproductive. And I wouldn't recommend to somebody to do more than maybe 1 or 2 of the 10-day retreats. Yeah. That's my opinion.
Oh,
Yeah.
but you had to experience all this to know this now.
Yeah. So, I really got into this Vipassana meditation and, took it very seriously. And then eventually, started to be able to access jhana states and just absolutely extraordinary states of tranquility, equanimity. And I took on this idea that if I could get into one of these states long enough, that liberation would be on the other end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, I think that the way my relationship with meditation was something akin to sometimes what happens to people with psychedelics.
Wonderful.
And of course, both of them can be just marvelous, marvelous tools. But if we don't really have, a better understanding, we can get lost.
And it's, this getting lost is just a path. It has to happen to learn something,
That's
to
part of
explore
it.
something. It's not being lost, like, oh, it's a mistake. There are no
Yeah.
mistakes in this. Even,
Yeah, for
sometimes
sure.
you think people, oh, they are stuck in this stage or something. They believe they're stuck, but it's all just passing by, just a temporary stop. It's no worries. Once you're on the train, you're
Yeah.
on the train. Yeah. Doesn't matter how many stops, you have to stop and explore what's going on there.
Yeah.
That's how I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, so for me, I was in this meditation path for quite a long time, and uh, eventually, what happened is it started to come into my awareness that there was still a lot of reactivity that I was experiencing, especially outside of retreat, and I felt like, well, this meditation technique is really supposed to be about getting to reactivity, right? And yet I wasn't seeing it. I wasn't seeing that in my day-to-day life. And it's not that I would say that other people would necessarily have seen me as such a reactive person, but I was very aware of it internally. So that, it's just kind of interesting how it probably took 10 years into my awakening to start to really become very curious about it. Why do I still have this much reactivity after this amount of time? It's one thing on retreat, but when you go home and it's still there, that's, pretty confusing. And it started to maybe bring in doubt that that this was, something that I should stay with. And then at a certain point, what happened was I lost the will to meditate.
Mm.
It just fell away. And it was kind of interesting how it happened because I would go and sit in my little meditation room at my house and sit down with the intention to meditate, and I couldn't get it going. And I kept trying over maybe a week or two, but the will was just falling away. And that actually, was kind of a little bit of a crisis because I didn't really have any idea. Like this had been so much a part of my life, so much of how I thought I would be spending the rest of my life, that if there was any possibility of, let's call it salvation in this lifetime, that would be it. Like I had a kind of certainty about it, and there wasn't any other possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of like the view I had. And so then I had the will to meditate fall away. And it was um, kind of confusing. And I just kind of went through a period of trying to make sense of it. What do I do from here? And interestingly, it was around that time, shortly after that falling away of being able to meditate, that things really started to take off again. And this is like for the first time since that, big first awakening 14 years ago. And what happened is I had a spontaneous mystical experience just one night, just before getting into bed. And a lot of, I guess, identity, like let's say aspects of identity just kind of like sprung out, it was almost like I could see aspects of identity. And I could see how I was identifying in some ways with what I thought was it to be a good person, even a good meditator, a vegetarian, what I thought were, good political values, things like that. And then I realized, wow, even if I were a convicted criminal sitting in a jail cell, it wouldn't be any better in some regards. It's still identification, you know?
It doesn't matter which suit we put on. It's still the
Yeah,
suit that needs to be taken off eventually.
yeah, yeah.
Just outgrowing
So
it.
there was kind of like a second honeymoon period that
Wow.
came with this too. And I could see how when thoughts would come again that had anything to do with identity or belief or judgment or things like that, it was almost as if I were coated with Teflon. It was almost like they would appear and then it was almost like they would slide. Yeah. Um, so this is 2015, and that was quite a huge year for me because my husband and I had 4 kids, and one of them was really struggling a lot, and trying to help this son, led me to try to kind of explore different things. He'd been struggling with a pretty severe drug addiction.
Mhm.
And we, after having tried a lot of different things, rehab, therapy, and so on, nothing was working. We actually found ibogaine, which is a plant medicine, and that literally saved his life. But then I knew enough that just, getting free of the addiction, which it definitely did, I knew enough about addiction to know that we had to get him into some sort of therapy. I didn't know what kind of therapy. But eventually what happened is a therapist told me about something called TRE, which stands for trauma releasing exercises. And that was something that, it was kind of interesting how that it kind of came into, my awareness as something ultimately to try to help our son. We also had a therapist trained in somatic experiencing as well. It was really wonderful. He's doing really well, by the way. It's 6 years since he's been, it's quite stable, and going through the awakening process himself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Mm.
Sweet.
But what was really interesting for me, when this therapist told me about TRE, it was to suggest that I look into it as a means to help our son. And I wasn't looking for it when I heard the words trauma releasing exercises. I thought, well, that applies to other people. I don't have trauma. In fact, I actually had this kind of attitude about trauma that it was, maybe an identity that people took on that was not helpful. I didn't really understand the topic very well at all. But this therapist had suggested I try it once just so I would have some idea of what it was and then find somebody to show our son, and then kind of support him for a while. And when I tried it for the first time, I think like a lot of people, I really didn't know what to make of it. But my curiosity was aroused enough that I thought, well, maybe I'll try this one more time.
Uh-huh.
And when I did it the next day, the way it landed for me, it was quite clear that this was something that I needed to explore. I had no idea what it was going to do, but it just felt clear that this is the next thing. And the interesting thing is, I did have a lot of chronic tension and I had pretty severe TMJ. So do you know what TMJ is?
No idea.
So it's when you have just like a really incredible level of tension in the jaw, and you can end up
Ah,
with grinding at night.
I see.
You can end up, it can be quite painful. Uh, I thought I was actually going to have to go to a specialized dentist to resolve it because it had been, really quite a problem for me. And actually, over the years since that first awakening, if anything, it had gotten worse. Took me a while to realize this, but I came to understand that with that first shift, there definitely was some Kundalini energy that got released as well. And it happened, in over the years again, more Kundalini energy. And I think, coming into this meditation practice, I already had a lot of chronic tension to start with. And then adding this Kundalini energy just ended up maybe driving more, let's call it like nervous system dysregulation. So I had, quite a painful situation with TMJ. If I can say, it was kind of like living with a really bad headache all the time. And there's just no getting a break from it. So when I discovered this thing called TRE, the astounding thing for me was, when I started to intuit that it would be useful for me, I started doing it pretty much every day from the beginning, maybe for 15 or 20 minutes. By 2 weeks into it, the TMJ was completely gone.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
I I couldn't believe it, that something that had just been plaguing me and causing so much suffering could be gone, just so easily. And that was, kind of like just the beginning. And what happened was, as I continued with this TRE process, what happened is it started to get to these blocks of chronic tension that were pretty much all over me, my shoulders, my legs, my core, my, upper body as well. And as this tension got, let's say, broken up and dissolved out, well, it was really interesting to me how much an effect that had on, let's say, consciousness. It was pretty amazing because I had been, in this meditation practice thinking that, it was going to, getting back that silence that I had in that first 3 months, to make that permanent would come from just, probably thousands of hours of meditation. That's the way I thought of it, And then I realized as I cleared out this chronic tension that I had it wrong, that the silence was actually already there, and that it was this chronic tension that was, you could say, driving this, these compulsive thinking patterns,
The noise.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, they were so correlated, and it took about 2 years for this chronic tension to be, let's say, broken up and mostly dissolved out. But it was so clear to me during this 2 year period. It was so obvious to me that, at least in my case, that there would have been no moving past that first awakening had I not encountered that. That things were in such a level of, let's call it like a mess, energetically, emotionally, reactivity, resistance patterns, that I really needed this somatic work to be able to just get that, get through that, let's say, the emotion and shadow work, that reactivity, resistance patterns. I think for most people, this is where, this is really the hardest part of the whole process, getting through this whole stage of things.
I agree,
So,
because, you may think that everything can be solved with the mind, but there's this physical body, the system, and it has its own process to go through and adjust and realign and reorganize the whole nervous system.
mhm,
So when the mind releases mental stuff, emotions releases emotional stuff, the body is still with its
yeah.
tension or what to do with it. Wow, so wonderful that you found this DRE. Wow. I tried
For
it
me, it
once or
was,
twice,
yeah,
but not religiously, but yeah, I see that it leaves a pleasant feeling after.
yeah.
It's good. Feels good.
I'm not fundamentalist about it. I don't think everybody needs to do it, but I think that there are certain people like myself that it was invaluable.
Mhm.
And I also want to say I've been doing yoga for probably about 15 years as well. And I've been doing a pretty serious yoga practice prior to discovering TRE, which is kind of interesting because you would think that a yoga practice would probably more or less get to the same things. But in my experience, it wasn't really. Like, I would do this 90-minute yoga practice, and at the end, I noticed that I would feel the best, in a 24-hour cycle. I would feel the best for the first 1 to 2 hours after. And I think yoga is really fantastic. I think a lot of these, body-based approaches can be really wonderful. But I don't think that it's something that is necessarily going to get to, let's say, this bound energy, you know.
Mhm.
Maybe for some people, like, I don't want to be, unequivocal about this, I don't know. But I can say that that was the case for me. Mm.
Well, it's nice to follow your own path and share what works for us. But it doesn't mean
Yeah.
that everyone has to start going to silent retreats now and do these exercises or be
Mm.
very, very serious about yoga.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
listening to you and it sounds so dedicated, so much focus into this. Amazing.
Another thing for me that was relevant at this time is I met and started working with Gary Weber.
Oh,
Do you know who he
yes,
is?
I know Gary Weber. We had a few exchanges. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was really, really lucky to work with Gary. That was really important too, because um, Gary really helped me in, the few years that I worked with him. Um, doing a lot of shadow work as well, working on beliefs. he introduced me to different things that turned out to be quite helpful. Yeah, and I mean, it was still, there was still, I would say like a, fair amount of chaos going on in my personal life for a while. This whole thing with our son, it took a couple of years for that to really settle down and resolve. Like, let's say it was until beginning of 2018 that he really became very stable. So yeah, so there was like lots of, looking into identity, even identity as a mother, identity of who is my son, you know. So many things were inquired into during this period. And then Gary stepped back from teaching around 2019. I think he's 81 now. And that was kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, if you recall, like 2019. And by this time, it was really quite remarkable what had happened. Let's say in the years between 2015 and 2019, if I think back like year over year, what was happening was really just really extraordinary, let's say emptying out of a lot of, I don't know, you could say conditioning, habituated patterns, of reactivity, resistance. And I had really quite an amazing access to inner silence most of the time by 2019. And I mean, subjectively, I'd never felt such a high level of well-being in my entire life. I really truly didn't. Physically, emotionally, psychologically, it was just such an incredible sense of freedom. And this was like where Gary stepped back from teaching, and something felt like, I don't know, I had this intuition that there was more, but I didn't know what. I really didn't know anything about maps of awakening, believe it or not. Like, I didn't know these things existed. Gary had never really talked about this
I
sort of
still
thing
don't
with
know.
me. So
I know they're out there, but I don't go.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe it's a good thing I didn't know. I don't know. But the thing is I think something in me there was something that like this. It was kind of a feeling of a responsibility that I knew I had come so far out of suffering. And I knew oh yeah, I would also say in 2017, I had a pretty big experience of Anatta. And so that kind of like opened my eyes to something beyond, just let's call it like the experience of well-being. But I didn't like, it was kind of interesting how I wasn't really even holding that as a goal. But something in me just knew, I don't know, had the sense of personal responsibility to let's call it the process itself, to keep going. And for the next couple of years, I was doing a lot of reading. I actually found my way to somebody who was a facilitator who was basically putting themselves out there as an expert on the teachings of Ramana Maharshi. And I worked with this person one-on-one. And in retrospect, I feel like that, was not really where I should have been working at that point, with more self-inquiry. I think that, look, of course, you look back and it couldn't have been any other way than it was. But what happened was eventually a certain kind of, I'm going to say a certain kind of frustration came forth. And it felt like, I think I'm going to have to figure this out on my own. And so I stopped working with this person. And I wasn't meditating, but I was just sitting. I was taking periods of time throughout the day. And there was a kind of like intensity behind it of sorts, in the sense that I knew there was something more to this awakening, but I didn't know what. And I felt like I'm not going to look at any more books. I'm not going to look at YouTube videos. I'm not going to try to find the answer somewhere else. And what happened is what started to come into view for me was pretty astounding. And that was about the senses, the sense gates. And it was kind of pivotal for me in the sense that I think to some extent I was reifying awareness, but didn't know it.
Hmm.
And then it started to dawn on me that, I don't know, the senses started to kind of like really come into the forefront. Instead of that, kind of like that heady sense of consciousness is everything. It was more like the something about the senses themselves were just coming into the forefront.
Uh-huh.
And then I realized, like, because I didn't understand this, but I realized I can't separate awareness from any of the sense gates. I went through them all, and I was astounded. And it was just also the recognition that this whole life I had been, let's say, gathering of, let's call it information data through the sense gates. And that consciousness was then, constructing a world out there. All the quote unquote knowledge I ever thought I had was really being constructed in the mind. And the whole interface upon which all this information had been gathered, I was just like astounded. I was like, how is it possible that I could go through my whole life and the interface itself has been overlooked?
Yeah, isn't that just looking back, isn't that crazy? It's like
It really
hiding in the
is.
plain sight.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And I would say I had some, let's say, uh, the body sense, I think, really started to wake up, several years earlier, between the TRE and, the yoga practice. And hearing was, clarifying. But I think, like a lot of people, the visual field was, quite challenging for me. And it was around this time that I found out about Angelo.
Uh-huh.
So a friend of mine discovered him, read his book, and came over to my house one day, and she brought his book, and she said, "Chris, I'm going to give you this book, and let's call it an early birthday gift. I think you're going to like it."
Cool.
And so I devoured the book, and I reached out to Angelo asking if he would be willing to work with me, and I was very lucky. He said yes. And, it was like believe it or not, at this stage of things, it was the first time anybody had given me any sense of where things were in terms of the process. We're talking like 20 years into this awakening process. And, he gave me some exercises to do to work with the visual field, which I did. And I was, finding it rather challenging. But eventually, what happened for me is, I could really sense how that relationship between, let's call it like the sense of presence and the visual field, how you could say, they construct that, like that sense of subject object. It started to kind of come into view. It would happen while driving, it would happen while walking, it would happen while, just sitting, with a cup of tea in the backyard. And, just kind of like seeing how this happens, eventually, it just, that that whole subject-object illusion dissolved. Mm.
And now what?
Yeah. So that was it. Things happened pretty quickly when I met Angelo. So I have to kind of think back. That was maybe 2.5 years ago. I'm not sure
Mhm.
now. And Angelo had told me that he said when non-dual realization is clarified, he said that that's basically the staging ground for no self. And I don't know it, I never really did quote unquote anything to, it wasn't kind of like I thought, okay, let's make that a new goal. Or, there was like a real feeling of contentment with non-dual realization. It was not, I would say there was no seeking energy at all.
Mhm.
Uh, anyway, the way it happened was just it really took me by surprise because I was just having a conversation with my husband one day, just a ordinary everyday conversation. And as we were speaking, it was like the most uh, obvious thing was that I wasn't there, that it was kind of, it was like actually a huge shock, to tell you the truth. And, I don't think I even said anything to him. Like we just carried on the conversation, but I remember just feeling like, oh my gosh, like, I don't think anything could have ever prepared me for this. And uh, yeah, for a few days, I was just kind of walking around in quite a state of shock. And there was a kind of strange kind of grief that was there for me that lasted for about 3 months.
3 months.
Yeah. Like it wasn't like I was in bed depressed or anything like that. But it was, I guess, grieving kind of, I don't know, grieving, you could say some idea I had, even the whole idea of having been on a spiritual path, right? Everything that had transpired up to then, it's like it obliterates even that, you know?
I remember reading Gary Weber's article about that when these beliefs are
Mhm.
broken, there is a grieving, there is a
Yeah.
sense of a loss, like a best friend died or something. That the system
Yeah.
has to go through that process to grieve, but it's physiological, neurological. It's a natural
Yeah.
process.
There's
Interesting.
like for me too, I would say like an energetic aspect of this as well. Very
Uh-huh.
much, in the bodily level as well. Um, so yeah, I spent probably about 3 months. This is like maybe a couple of summers ago. Um, I think, the way people go through this can vary widely. Some people
Yeah.
laugh, right? Some people have a rather easy time.
So it
Um,
seems, we don't know
yeah,
how many years of depression before or after.
yeah. I think it can vary quite a lot how this goes for people. And I don't know if that's what you see as well, like that um, people can have really intense reactions.
Yes, that's what I see. And as you say, everyone is different, is unique, and everyone's process is different and unique.
Mm.
But listening to you and your dedication and how many hours you meditated and did this and that, and just step by step, little tiny bit by little tiny bit, and here you are. It's like a hero's journey. But I meet a lot of people that they go like, enlightenment 5 o'clock, why is it not here yet?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Chill. Give yourself time, 10, 20 years till the end of days. Everything is unfolding already anyway. So it's no
That's right.
rush. No
That's
rush.
right. That's right.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
needs to be seen eventually will be seen, and it's not up to me when or how.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
But there's a lot of that rush now. Oh, I don't want to live another lifetime. This has to be the last one.
Yeah.
There's not enough
Things
time.
have- I think things have changed so much,
Mhm.
like when I think back when this really got started for me, it was 2001. I think it's changed so much since then
Yeah,
because
agree.
in 2001, I think for many people, it wasn't even a realistic goal, you know? At least the people that I knew. Um, maybe, maybe Eckhart Tolle's book, changed things, maybe, helped a lot of people get through that first shift. And then I think YouTube has done amazing things, in terms of helping people um, awaken and, get a better understanding of how to do emotion work and shadow work and, you know,
Yeah, it's all ready there. So much information, and it's getting more mainstream. Not mainstream, but more acceptable. So when I
mm,
started looking into that, it was 2010. Like you hear words no self is like a taboo. You can tell somebody, oh, there is no you. They will
yeah.
throw you out of the group and say, get out of here, all this nonsense. Yeah. Mm. But it's great that more and more people are finding this because that's the way out of the trap of identity and out of suffering.
Mm,
And although it takes a lot of years to settle and a lot of more insights to uncover and live your everyday experience with this new seeing, it's just one thing that makes the real change,
mhm.
shakes the
Yeah.
system to the core, and then life turns to another way. What was done gets to get undone.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why it's so wonderful to hear your story in such a fine detail because for many people, they will find something to resonate with and say, oh, that's okay. Oh, God, that's okay. It's not just me.
Yeah. Mhm.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people, awaken in so many different ways, I mean, countless different ways. I've sent some people that I meet with to Liberation Unleashed, to work with a guide and um, seen good results there.
Thank you.
I've seen a couple of people work up, believe it or not, through AA to get through that first shift. Um, for some people, working with maybe ayahuasca, um, so many different ways.
Yeah, everything's included. It's all available. Like, which candy are you gonna take on? But just be careful, it's a red pill. Oh, go way back. Once you bite on that, that's it.
But it's the emotion and the shadow work. I think looking into reactivity, this is, what I see with people. These are the things that, um, it's we can't rush our way through that. It has to be pretty thorough.
Mm. I like how one of my guests said, well, it's a lifestyle. It's a
Mm.
lifestyle. You just start undoing, being your own facilitator of undoing everything. It's a lifestyle. It's not a quick job or there's some destination. Just relax and enjoy the ride.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah,
And now you are facilitating people as well, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And how can they find you?
So I have a website, which is my first and last name, my full name, Christina Guimond at, um, um, was it ChristinaGuimond.com.
Mhm. I'll put that in the description. Mhm.
Thank you, Ilona, so much for the beautiful work that you're doing. It's an amazing
Thank
resource for
you.
people.
When I saw that there is no self and that changed my life, I just had to scream off the rooftop. Say, everyone, this is what you're looking for. You can throw anything at me. I don't care. Have a look. Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
there was so much passion back then, 2010, 11. Yeah. When I started to point, like, look here, that's not the
Wow.
right way you're looking. Look here.
How many people do you think have come through, the process now?
To be honest, I don't know. It used to be like everyone that comes to Liberation Unleashed, let's say about half would would complete the conversation with what we would agree it's seeing on the shift. Now I think it's less, and
Really?
everything changed.
Hmm.
Um, Guides changed, people changed, the whole environment changed. Now we do more Zoom or speak face to face, and it's completely different process than the forum because you can
Interesting.
see, you can help prepare the
Hmm.
ground, and you can help or assist while the seed is opening, and then all the rest, whatever is happening. It's a long
Yeah.
process. It's no
Yeah.
rush, no rush anymore. Like next,
Yeah.
yeah. So
I think,
I think it's
yeah.
thousands that went through. How many of them genuinely had a shift? I wouldn't know.
Hmm.
But as I say, it's just a little opening. It's a gate. You go through the gate, you're free. You explore, you fall, you stand up, you carry on, you go this way, you go that way. It's your freedom to see what works for you and find your own path and your own voice and help others. That's all.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Mm.
Hmm.
One of my clients recommended to speak to you.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Hello.
I know who you're speaking of. Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
And I'm so enjoying doing this podcast as I get to meet people like you, like Angelo,
Hmm.
like Alice, that are on this, you can't really call it mission, but it's just a job. Somebody
Yeah.
has to do it, right? Being called to do it. So here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you're doing it.
Me too. I'm glad you're doing it.
These conversations are, I'm sure, super helpful for a lot of people. Mm.
Yeah, because it helps to dispel the expectations and also opens up a new techniques and new methods and new possibilities to work with whatever emotionally, physically, or mentally that needs to be worked with. And none of that is wrong, but
Mm.
you don't know until somebody tells you, right?
Mm.
You don't know until you know. So I'm just with the torch showing different possibilities.
Mm.
And I think the main message is from everyone that I speak to is that you have to focus on what you are doing. Forget about what other people say for a moment. For the moment of truth, you have to look inside within you. What's true for you? What's going on here? Because all this is good. All that is fine. But that's not going to do it.
Yeah.
What happens is the attention turns here, and then things start to get revealed. And if you need to go to a silent retreat, you go to silent retreat. It's available. We can just sit in the kitchen with screaming kids. It's the same. It doesn't matter. But yeah, finding that shift towards here
Mhm.
is the key,
Yeah.
isn't it?
It really, really, truly is. I tell to people, that I meet with that I actually, I have a deep respect for that awakening intelligence within them. That it knows so much more than the two of our minds together. And that if my job, if anything, is to kind of connect you to that, right? It's like that discernment process.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, putting the light bulb on. Dun-dun. It's there.
Yeah.
Wait. Well, thank you so much, Chris.
Oh,
Such a pleasure to
thank
talk
you.
to you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And thank you everyone for listening, for watching. Press like if you like, comment if you like, and subscribe because that really helps to get this message across to more people. That's how it works, YouTube. So thank you everyone, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.